The air at Yonsei University always smelled of three things: old money, damp earth, and ambition. For Nia, tending the meticulous rows of royal azaleas that bordered the main quad, it mostly smelled like survival. Each perfectly pruned branch, each weed pulled from the rich soil, was a down payment on her brother's future. $8,750 per semester. The number was branded onto the back of her mind, a constant low-grade hum beneath the clipped cadence of academic lectures she overheard from open windows. Her skin, the color of rich coffee, was usually slick with a sheen of effort, a stark contrast to the pale, leisurely faces that drifted past her on the stone pathways. Her hair, a cloud of tight black coils, was always pulled back beneath a practical scarf, tucked away. Her uniform, a simple gray polo and khaki work pants, was a cloak of invisibility. It marked her as part of the scenery, as vital and as unacknowledged as the sprinkler systems that hissed to life in the pre-dawn quiet. Her hands, though, her hands betrayed a different story. They were calloused, yes, the palms tough from the handles of shears and trowels, but her fingers were long and elegant, her nails kept short and clean. They moved with a surgeon's precision, a deftness that seemed out of place for someone who spent her days wrestling with soil and roots. They were hands that knew more than just gardening. Her eyes, watchful and intelligent, missed nothing. She saw the nervous tick of the history professor who was having an affair with a graduate student. She saw the subtle exchange of USB drives between two seemingly innocuous business majors. She saw the quiet, lonely boy who often sat on a bench near her flower beds, his sketchbook open, but his gaze fixed on the meticulous way she worked. He was maybe 7 or 8, with his father's serious eyes and a stillness that was unusual for a child. He was always immaculately dressed, a tiny man in a bespoke blazer, dropped off by a silent driver in a black sedan that hummed with quiet power. Nia knew the car. Everyone who worked on the grounds knew the car. It belonged to Kang Dae-ho. His name was spoken in hushed tones by the university's administration. He was a major donor, a logistics and investment magnate. But the grounds crew, the janitors, the kitchen staff, they used a different word, whispered when the managers were out of earshot. Joe Pack, gangster. He was the shadow chairman of the university's board, his influence absolute, his presence a rumor that chilled the air. Nia had seen him only a few times, a figure of disciplined violence moving through the hallowed halls of academia. He moved with a predatory grace, flanked by 2 men who were his living shadows. His suits were so perfectly tailored, they seemed a part of his body, the fabric whispering of a wealth that could buy entire departments. Today she'd seen him drop his son off, a rare, fleeting moment of paternal duty. A simple touch to the boy's shoulder before the black car had glided away. And the boy, Min Seok, had taken his usual spot on the bench, his silent vigil over her work beginning anew. A bead of sweat traced a path down her temple. The humidity was a thick blanket, promising rain. She needed to finish applying the nutrient spray before the downpour. Her brother David had called last night. His voice was bright, full of excitement about his computational biology course. He didn't know she'd sold her mother's last piece of jewelry to cover the lab fees. He didn't know she worked 70 hours a week, taking extra shifts cleaning the labs at night, just to keep him here, to keep his dream pristine and untouched by the gritty reality of their finances. He thought she had a quiet administrative job in the registrar's office, a respectable, boring lie she carefully maintained. He would be ashamed if he knew, not of her, but for her. His pride was the one luxury she couldn't afford to damage. A frantic energy began to ripple through the staff. Mr. Choi, the head groundskeeper, came scurrying towards her, his face pale and sweating despite the overcast sky. "Nia see," he stammered, his hands fluttering like trapped birds. "Chairman Park is on his way. He's doing a surprise inspection of the Centennial Garden. Make sure everything is perfect. Chairman Park Min-jun." The name left a sour taste in her mouth. Where Kang Dae-ho was a silent, cold threat, Park was a loud, petty one. An heir to a construction fortune who sat on the board because of his father's endowment, he treated the university as his personal fiefdom. He was known for his performative cruelty, for humiliating staff for sport. He particularly seemed to enjoy targeting the foreign workers. "Yes, Mr. Choi." Nia's voice was deferential, the mask of the subservient worker sliding perfectly into place. "I was just finishing here." "Good, good," he wiped his brow with a handkerchief. He was in a terrible mood at the last luncheon, complained the kimchi was too sour. Mr. Choi scurried off, already broadcasting his anxiety to the next unlucky employee. Nia took a deep, centering breath. Her posture, which had been stooped over a stubborn patch of clover, straightened, just for a second. A fractional shift, a realignment of her spine that spoke of a discipline far removed from horticulture. It was the posture of a former analyst at the State Department, a woman who had once briefed generals and dissected intelligence from the Korean peninsula. A woman who had been fostered by a retired ROK Army colonel in Itaewon after her diplomat parents died. A man who had taught her not just the language, but the culture of power that underpinned it. A life she had been forced to abandon when her mother's illness had devoured their savings, and then her life, leaving Nia responsible for a mountain of medical debt and a teenage brother. She deliberately softened her stance, letting her shoulders slump again. Invisible. That was the goal. Be invisible. Finish the work. Get the check. Pay the tuition. The mantra that had governed her life for the past 3 years. The first drop of rain hit the back of her neck. Cold, then another and another. The sky, which had been threatening all morning, finally broke. It wasn't a gentle shower. It was a sudden, violent deluge. The stone pathways darkened instantly, the air filling with the sound of a million tiny impacts. Students yelped and ran for cover, a flurry of colorful umbrellas blooming across the quad. Nia glanced at the boy, Min Seok. He was still on the bench, his small face tilted up to the sky, looking more curious than concerned. He hadn't brought an umbrella. His silent driver was nowhere in sight. Instinct, pure and simple, took over. The same instinct that made her shield a delicate new seedling from a sudden frost. She abandoned her tools, striding quickly to the bench. The rain was plastering her polo shirt to her skin, her hair already shrinking into tighter coils. She didn't hesitate. She shrugged off her thin work jacket, her only protection against the sudden chill, and held it over the boy's head, creating a small makeshift canopy. He looked up at her, his serious eyes wide with surprise. A flicker of something, gratitude, confusion, crossed his face. He was so small under her arm. "You'll get wet," she said, her voice soft. He simply shook his head, clutching his sketchbook to his chest. And that's when they arrived. A gleaming Mercedes sedan pulled up to the curb with an arrogant splash, and Chairman Park Min-jun emerged, sheltered by a massive umbrella held by a flunky. He was a man in his late 40s, soft and florid, his face a mask of perpetual dissatisfaction. His eyes, small and porcine, scanned the quad and landed on the scene. The black groundskeeper, soaked to the bone, holding her shabby jacket over the immaculate son of Kang Dae-ho, his lips twisted into a cruel smirk. This was an opportunity, an audience, the perfect stage for a little lesson in hierarchy. "Aigu!" his voice boomed, cutting through the downpour. He strode towards them, his expensive leather shoes somehow avoiding the puddles. "What do we have here? Such touching charity." Nia froze. She kept the jacket steady over Min Seok's head, her body tensing. She could feel the boy shrink closer to her side. Park stopped a few feet away, looking her up and down with theatrical disdain. He switched to Korean, the language a weapon meant to exclude and demean her. "Yeah," he began, the informal address a calculated insult. "Look at this one, soaking wet like a sewer rat, trying to curry favor. Do you think he'll give you a tip? Do you even know whose son that is?" Nia remained silent, her face a neutral mask. Her heart was hammering against her ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. $8,750. Don't react. Don't give him the satisfaction. Be invisible. "What's the matter? Can't you understand?" Park sneered, enjoying the show. His flunky giggled nervously. "Of course you can't. You people are good for digging in the dirt, not for understanding civilized conversation." He gestured dismissively at the azaleas she had just spent hours tending. "Look at this mess. You've probably ruined them. What would a dark-skinned thing like you know about the delicate beauty of Korean flowers?" Each word was a physical blow. Racist, classist, public. He was performing for an unseen audience, reinforcing his own power by crushing hers. She could feel the heat of shame creep up her neck. a fire the cold rain couldn't extinguish. Her grip on the jacket tightened. Min Seok looked from Park to Nia, his small face pale with a fear that was clearly not for himself. "I bet you think you're being clever," Park continued, stepping closer. The smell of his expensive cloying cologne mixed with the fresh scent of rain. "Thinking the great Kang Dae-ho will notice your pathetic little gesture. Let me tell you something. He doesn't see people like you. You are furniture." He punctuated the insult with a flick of his hand, knocking the trowel and hand rake from the grass beside her. They clattered into a muddy puddle with a sickening splash. The world seemed to slow down. The sound of the rain, the distant traffic, the hammering in her own chest, it all receded into a dull roar. There was only the mud seeping into her tools, the sneer on Park's face, and the small, warm body of the child pressed against her side. Survival. Dignity. The two forces warred within her. Survival screamed at her to bow her head, to apologize, to pick up the tools and scrub them clean. Survival whispered the number, 8,750. David's future. But dignity was a colder, harder thing. It was the memory of her father discussing policy in crisp, fluent Korean. It was the weight of her mother's hand, teaching her to write her name in Hangul. It was the legacy of a family that had served, that had built, that had never, ever bowed to petty tyrants. 3 seconds, that's all it was. 1, the weight of David's tuition, the fear of unemployment, of homelessness. 2, the feel of Min Seok's small hand tentatively gripping the fabric of her pants. A silent plea for protection. 3, the echo of her foster father's voice, a gruff Busan accent from years past. Dignity is the only armor they can't take from you unless you hand it to them. She made her choice. The shift was subtle, but absolute. Her shoulders, which had been curved in a posture of deference, squared. Her chin, which had been tucked, lifted. She met Chairman Park's gaze directly. The mask of the timid servant dissolved, replaced by an unnerving stillness. The rain continued to fall, running in rivulets down her face, but she didn't seem to notice. She gently removed her jacket from over Min Seok's head, handing it to the boy. He took it, his eyes locked on her. Then she spoke. Her voice was not loud, but it carried with the chilling clarity of a breaking icicle. And it was in Korean. Not just Korean, but the precise formal register one would use to address a superior, yet laced with the unmistakable, hard-edged consonants of a Busan dialect. It was the Korean of dock workers and gangsters, polished with the grammar of a diplomat. It was a linguistic impossibility, and it struck Chairman Park with the force of a physical blow. "Bag Ho Jang Nim," she began, the honorific title delivered with razor-sharp irony. Chairman Park. The smirk on Park's face froze, then shattered. The color drained from his cheeks, leaving behind a pasty, mottled gray. His flunkey's nervous giggling choked off into a strangled gasp. "A child's well-being is not a currency for favor," Nia continued in the same deadly quiet Korean, her pronunciation impeccable. "And the health of these azaleas," she gestured almost casually to the flower bed, "is compromised not by my work, but by the substandard fertilizer contract approved by your committee last quarter, the one that saved the university 13%, which was then reallocated to the Campus Beautification Discretionary Fund. Your discretionary fund." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a predator that has just realized the rabbit it was toying with is actually a wolf. The rain seemed to fall harder, louder, as if trying to fill the void she had just created. Park's mouth opened and closed, no sound coming out. He looked at her as if seeing her for the first time. The invisible woman, the piece of furniture, had just spoken to him in his own language with a regional accent he couldn't place, and accused him of financial misconduct with terrifying specificity. Who are you?" he finally stammered, the Korean words clumsy in his mouth. Nia offered no answer. She simply held his gaze. Just a waitress with good ears. The old mic drop line from a life she thought she'd left behind echoed in her mind. She didn't say it. She didn't have to. The look in her eyes said it all. A car door opened with a soft, expensive click. Kang Dae-ho stepped out of the black sedan that had been parked 50 yards away, half hidden by a sprawling oak tree. He had no umbrella. The rain darkened the shoulders of his immaculate charcoal suit, but he seemed impervious to it, an island of calm authority in the downpour. His two shadows materialized behind him, holding their positions by the car. He had been watching. The whole time. He moved not with Park's blustering haste, but with a deliberate, unhurried pace that was far more menacing. His eyes, cold and calculating, were not on Park. They were on Naya. He took in her soaked uniform, her straightened spine, the protective way she still stood slightly in front of his son. He stopped beside them, his presence sucking the very air from around them. He looked down at his son, Min Seok, who was clutching Nia's jacket. "Did you thank the lady?" Daeho's voice was a low baritone, quiet but laced with steel. He spoke in English, a public language for a public space. Min Seok nodded shyly, then looked at Nia. "Gamsahamnida," he whispered. "Thank you." Daeho's gaze shifted to Chairman Park. The temperature seemed to drop by 20 degrees. Park flinched as if he'd been struck. "Chairman Park." Daeho's voice was flat, devoid of any emotion. "My son was enjoying the rain. You interrupted him. It wasn't a question. It was a judgment. Boss Kang, I didn't realize." Park sputtered, bowing slightly, his earlier arrogance completely gone, replaced by a raw, naked fear. "I was just concerned. For the boy." Daeho didn't even glance at him. His attention returned to Nia. For a long moment, he just looked at her, his expression unreadable. It was not a look of pity or of charity. It was a look of assessment, of recognition. He saw not a groundskeeper, but the woman who had just dismantled a powerful man with a few well-chosen sentences in his own tongue. He saw an asset, an anomaly, something valuable. "You're cold," he stated, a simple observation. He shrugged off his own suit jacket, a garment that probably cost more than her brother's entire semester, and draped it over her shoulders. It was heavy, warm, and smelled faintly of cedar and power. The gesture was so unexpected, so intimate in its publicness, that it stunned Nia into silence. It was a shield, a claim. "My driver will take you and my son to the main house," he said. It wasn't a request. "You can get dry there. We will speak later." He then turned his full, chilling attention to Park Min-jun, who now looked like he was about to be physically ill. Daeho took a step closer to the trembling man, his voice dropping to a near whisper that was somehow more terrifying than a shout. He switched to the same rough, Busan-inflected Korean Naya had used. "My business, my family, they are not props for your little games. We are going to have a conversation, you and I, about fertilizer." Nia felt a gentle tug on her hand. It was Min Seok. He led her towards the waiting sedan, his father's jacket a heavy protective weight on her shoulders. As the car door closed, sealing her in a world of quiet leather and tinted glass, she looked back. Kang Daeho stood motionless in the rain, a dark king on a chessboard of his own making, while Chairman Park Min-jun finally began to tremble. The game had changed, and she, the invisible pawn, was now at the center of it. The Kang estate wasn't a house. It was a fortress disguised as a museum. Perched on a hill overlooking the city, it was a stark symphony of gray stone, darkened wood, and vast plains of glass. An elderly, silent housekeeper led Nia through halls that echoed with emptiness, past priceless ceramics and stark modern art, to a guest suite that was larger than her entire apartment. A fresh set of simple, elegant clothes, a black silk blouse and soft gray trousers, were laid out for her on the bed. After a hot shower that felt like it was washing away years of grime and humiliation, Nia stood before a floor-to-ceiling window. Daeho's jacket was draped over a chair, an alien object of impossible expense in this temporary world. Below, the city lights were beginning to glitter against the bruised purple of the twilight sky. She was a prisoner here, albeit a gilded one, a curiosity, an asset waiting to be assessed. There was a soft knock. Daeho entered without waiting for an answer. He had changed into a simple black turtleneck and dark pants. In the soft lighting of the room, stripped of his boardroom armor, he looked less like a corporate titan and more like what he was, a predator at rest. He carried a tray with 2 cups of steaming tea. He set the tray down on a low table between 2 armchairs, the clink of porcelain the only sound. He gestured for her to sit. It was a command disguised as an invitation. She complied, her movements measured. She would not show fear. She had earned this seat. He sat opposite her, the space between them charged with unspoken questions. He pushed a cup towards her. The scent was of barley and something earthy. "Busan," he stated, his English precise. "Your accent has traces of it, but your grammar is from Seoul, formal, educated." "I had a good teacher," Nia replied, her voice even. She didn't elaborate. Information was currency, and she was done being poor. "You also know about university contract allocation," he continued, his eyes never leaving hers. "That is not something a gardener would know." "A gardener with good ears," she said, the line finally finding its voice. It dripped with the weight of all she was not saying. A flicker of something, amusement, respect, danced in his cold eyes. It was gone as quickly as it appeared. "Park Min-joon is a problem. He is loud, greedy, and stupid. A dangerous combination. He has been a nuisance in my periphery for some time. He threatened my job," Nia said, her voice flat, "and my brother's education." "I can ensure your job is safe," Daeho offered. "I can pay for your brother's tuition, all of it." This was the moment, the offer of rescue, the golden cage, the man of power swooping in to save the damsel. It was the easy path, the one she was supposed to take with gratitude and deference. Survival screamed yes, dignity said no. Nia looked at the man who commanded a criminal empire, a man who could solve her most pressing problem with a flick of his pen, and she refused the role he had offered her. "I don't want your charity, Mr. Kang," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "I want a trade." He leaned back, his stillness a form of listening. "A trade? Park isn't just a nuisance," she began, shifting from the defensive to the offensive. She was no longer the subject of the conversation. She was the analyst presenting her findings. "His stupidity isn't random, it's a cover. His construction company, Hanul Engineering, has been losing money for 5 years. Public records. Yet he lives like a king. The university is his personal bank. The fertilizer contract, that was small. A test. I think he's skimming millions from the larger infrastructure projects." Daeho's expression remained unchanged, but a new intensity sharpened his gaze. She had his full attention. "You want me to provide you with the resources to prove this," he deduced. It wasn't a question. "I want access," Nia corrected him. "A secure terminal, university financial records, construction blueprints. In return, I will give you the weapon to destroy him, not with fists or threats, which he would expect and which would draw unwanted attention, but with numbers. A clean, quiet, financial execution that will not only remove him from the board, but will sever his political and financial ties permanently. You get rid of your nuisance, and the university funds he's been embezzling are freed up. Funds that support scholarships, like my brother's." She had laid her cards on the table. She wasn't an object to be protected. She was a strategist offering a superior solution. She was offering him a service he couldn't procure from his stable of thugs and accountants. She was offering him her mind. For a full minute, he said nothing. The silence stretched thick with consequence. He studied her, his eyes probing, searching for weakness. He found none. He found only steel. "You are not a gardener," he said finally. "Not anymore," Nia replied. He gave a single sharp nod. It was a contract being signed, an alliance being forged. "I have a secure location. Anything you need will be provided. My man, Mr. Kim, will be your contact." He stood. The meeting was over. "Park will try to retaliate. He will not take today's humiliation lying down. You will be a target." "I know," Nia said. "Let him try." The next week was a blur of encrypted data and sleepless nights. The secure location was a minimalist penthouse apartment with bulletproof windows and a view of the Han River. Mr. Kim, a grim-faced man who communicated in grunts, had supplied her with a laptop that was a fortress of digital security. For the first time in years, Nia felt the old parts of her brain click back into place. The analyst, the investigator, the woman who saw the world as a series of patterns waiting to be deciphered, was awake. She worked alone, fueled by coffee and a cold, burning sense of purpose. The university's financials were a tangled mess, deliberately obfuscated, but Nia had been trained to find the single dissonant thread that could unravel the entire tapestry. She cross-referenced invoices from Hanul Engineering with public records for material costs, finding massive overcharges. She analyzed soil composition reports for new construction sites, matching them against invoices for excavation work that was never done. It was a ghost operation, billions of one vanishing into thin air. Park, as predicted, did not stay quiet. 2 days after their confrontation, Mr. Choi called her, his voice trembling with apology. She was fired. "Orders from the board," he'd whispered, "for insubordination." The next day, an email arrived in David's student account. A hold had been placed on his financial aid pending a review of eligibility. The bureaucratic language was a flimsy veil for the threat beneath. "I can still crush you," Daeho called. His voice was cold as ice over the secure line. "He's targeting your family. This is a line you do not cross. I will send my men." "No," Nia said, her voice sharp, authoritative. She was looking at a complex network diagram she'd built, mapping Park's shell corporations. "That's what he wants. He wants you to react with force. It would make you look like a thug and him like a victim. It would draw the kind of official attention neither of us wants." "He needs to be disciplined." Daeho's tone was flat, non-negotiable. "And he will be," Nia countered, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "But not your way. A public brawl gives him an audience. We're going to give him a public execution, but one where he's the only one who bleeds. Trust my plan, Mr. Kang." There was a pause on the other end of the line. She had just overruled the head of the Seoul Underground. She had told a man who killed for a living that his methods were wrong. The plan had better work, he said, and hung up. The threat wasn't just financial. A few nights later, she was walking the short distance from a small market back to the penthouse. The street was quiet, slick with a recent drizzle. A black van screeched to a halt beside her. 2 men in tracksuits jumped out, their faces hard. They weren't Daeho's men. "Chairman Park sends his regards," one of them grunted, reaching for her. The years of invisibility had made them careless. They saw a small woman, not a threat. They didn't see the way her body settled into a low center of gravity. They didn't see the flicker of combat calculation in her eyes. Her foster father, the old colonel, had insisted on self-defense training. "A woman like you," he'd said, "brilliant and alone, will always be a target. You must be your own weapon." The first man grabbed her arm. She didn't pull away. She went with the motion, pivoted on the ball of her foot, and drove the heel of her palm up under his nose. There was a sickening crunch of cartilage. He staggered back, howling, blood pouring down his face. The second man stared in shock for a precious half-second. It was all she needed. She kicked his knee sideways, a brutal, disabling blow. As he buckled, she brought her elbow down hard on the back of his neck. He collapsed in a heap. She stood over them, her breath coming in ragged gasps, adrenaline singing in her veins. She hadn't fought like that in years. The skill was still there, buried but not gone. She didn't wait around. She was a ghost before the first man's screams attracted any attention. Back in the penthouse, her hands trembled as she washed the blood from her knuckles. Not her blood. The incident was a grim confirmation. Park was desperate, and desperate men made mistakes. Her breakthrough came 2 days later, in the deep night hours. It was a single line item in a subsidiary account of one of Park's shell companies. A payment to a maritime logistics firm. Daeho's firm. It was his most important legitimate business, the one that gave him a veneer of respectability. The payment was coded as Port Authority inspection fees. It was a plant. Park wasn't just trying to steal money. He was trying to frame Daeho for bribery, creating leverage or, worse, bringing federal investigators down on his entire organization. She immediately called the secure line. "He's making a move on your shipping company," she said without preamble, her voice urgent. "He's planted a fake bribery trail. He's trying to set you up." She explained the data she'd found, the timing, the specific accounts. There was a long silence on the other end. She had just seen something his own intelligence network had missed. She hadn't just analyzed Park, she had analyzed the threat to Daeho himself. She had protected him. "How do we stop it?" His voice was different. The coldness was still there, but it was layered with something else, a grudging, profound respect. "We don't stop it," Nia said, a plan crystallizing in her mind, cold and beautiful and perfect. "We let it happen, and we use it to spring the trap. There's a full board meeting in 3 days. He's presenting the final proposal for the new biotech campus. That's where we end this." She spent the next 48 hours preparing. She didn't just assemble data. She built a narrative, a story of greed and corruption so clear and undeniable, it would be impossible to ignore. Daeho's people worked in the background, silent and efficient, securing what she needed: a place on the agenda, an introduction, a specific seat at the table. The day of the board meeting, Mr. Kim arrived with a garment bag. Inside was a suit of midnight blue silk that fit her as if it were custom-made, and a pair of simple, elegant black heels. It was armor of a different kind. When she looked in the mirror, she didn't see the groundskeeper. She didn't even see the analyst. She saw a woman she hadn't seen in a long time. A woman who belonged in rooms where power was brokered. A woman who was about to take back everything that had been stolen from her. The boardroom was an imposing chamber of dark mahogany and old leather. The air was thick with the scent of power and entitlement. 20 of the most influential people in the country sat around the massive table, their faces bored and impassive. Chairman Park stood at the head of the table, a projector screen glowing behind him, displaying architectural renderings of his grand new project. He was preening, expansive, the humiliation on the quad seemingly forgotten. The main door opened. The university president cleared his throat. "Gentlemen, we have one final item on the agenda. We have been approached by a representative for a new, significant benefactor who has expressed interest in the university's long-term financial integrity. They have sent their auditor to observe today's proceedings and present a preliminary report. Please welcome Ms. Nia Williams." Nia walked into the room. The sound of her heels on the marble floor was the only sound. All eyes turned to her. A ripple of confusion went through the board members. They saw a stranger, a striking black woman in a suit that spoke of quiet, immense wealth. But Park saw her. His eyes widened. The color, once again, drained from his face. He stared at her as if he were seeing a ghost. The gardener, the furniture, the sewer rat. Standing here, in his sanctum, exuding an aura of command that eclipsed his own. She didn't look at him. Not yet. She took the seat that had been prepared for her, directly opposite him, and placed a slim, encrypted tablet on the gleaming table in front of her. She nodded to the president. "Thank you for accommodating me." Her voice was calm, her English unaccented and professional. Park found his voice, a strangled, incredulous sound. "What is the meaning of this? Who is she? She has no place here. She's a fired employee." The president looked uncomfortable. "Chairman Park, Ms. Williams is here as a guest of the board, representing a considerable potential investment." "I don't care! Get her out!" he shouted, his composure shattering. Nia finally lifted her eyes and met his. The cold contempt in her gaze silenced him. "Chairman Park," she said, her voice carrying across the silent room. "If you would allow me to proceed, I believe my report is directly relevant to your ambitious proposal." She tapped the screen of her tablet. The architectural renderings behind Park vanished, replaced by a complex flowchart of bank accounts and shell corporations. His face appeared on the screen, linked to Hanul Engineering, which was linked to a dozen other entities. "My benefactor," she began, her voice a cool, dispassionate instrument of destruction, "is concerned with fiscal responsibility. So, I took a brief look at the university's recent expenditures, specifically those related to your company, Hanul Engineering." She calmly, methodically walked the board through the ghost contracts, the inflated invoices, the non-existent excavation work. She used their own language, leveraged assets, capital flow, fiduciary duty. With every sentence, she stripped away another layer of his carefully constructed facade. The other board members, who had looked bored moments before, were now leaning forward, their faces grim. They could smell the blood in the water. They could smell a scandal that could taint them all. "Which brings us," Nia continued, her tone dropping, "to the proposed biotech campus, an admirable project, costing 300 billion won, of which my analysis shows 60 billion is projected to be funneled through 3 new shell corporations, registered in the Cayman Islands just last week." She put the account numbers on the screen. "And from there, into Hanul Engineering's debt servicing accounts." Park was white as a sheet, his hands gripping the edge of the table so hard his knuckles were white. "This is slander, lies, fabricated nonsense." "Is it?" Nia asked softly. She swiped the screen. A new document appeared. "This is a wire transfer confirmation, dated yesterday, from one of those Cayman accounts to a firm called Apex Maritime Solutions, for Port Authority inspection fees. A payment intended to look like a bribe. She paused, letting the weight of the words settle. Apex Maritime Solutions, she said, her voice cold as steel, is a subsidiary of Kang Investments, my benefactor. You weren't just stealing from the university, Chairman Park. You were trying to frame a member of this very community to cover your tracks. The final blow. She had not only exposed his theft, she had exposed his attack on one of their own, a man far more powerful and feared than he could ever be. She had turned his own weapon against him. The room erupted. The board members were on their feet, shouting, their faces masks of fury and betrayal. Park stood frozen, exposed, his empire of lies crumbling around him in real time. He looked at Nia, his eyes wild with panic and hatred. You, he whispered, the single word filled with venom. You, worthless. He lunged, not at the board members, but at her, a last desperate act of violence. He never made it. A figure moved with impossible speed from the corner of the room. Kang Dae-ho, who had been standing silently by the door like one of his own shadows, intercepted him. He didn't hit Park. He didn't need to. He simply caught him by the front of his jacket, his grip like iron, and held him in place. The meeting, Dae-ho said to the chaos, his voice a whip crack of authority that cut through the noise, is over. He looked at Park, his eyes devoid of all emotion. You are finished. He released him. Park stumbled back, collapsing into his chair, a broken man. He looked at Nia, his face pleading. Please, he begged. I can pay you. I can give you anything. Nia stood up, gathering her tablet. She looked down at the man who had tried to destroy her, the man who had called her a sewer rat, and felt nothing but a vast cold emptiness where her fear used to be. It was never about money, she said, her voice barely a whisper, a final, devastating judgment. It was about the flowers. She turned and walked out of the room, not looking back. Behind her, the sound of the university president's frantic call to the authorities was the epilogue to a war she had already won. 6 months later, the office was clean, minimalist, with a single perfect orchid on the desk. The window looked out over the main quad, over the immaculate beds of royal azaleas. Nia's name was on the door, inscribed on a simple brass plaque. Nia Williams, Director, Office of Financial Integrity. The position hadn't existed 6 months ago. The board, in a desperate act of damage control, and under the heavy suggestion of its most powerful benefactor, had created it for her. It was her victory, earned and paid for. The door opened and her brother David walked in, grinning. He dropped a heavy textbook onto her desk. Got an A on the quantum mechanics midterm, he announced, beaming. I never doubted it, she said, her smile genuine and relaxed. The weight was gone. The constant humming anxiety about the 8,750 had been replaced by a quiet sense of security. David was safe. His future was his own. You're coming for dinner Sunday, right? He asked. I'm making galbi. I wouldn't miss it, she promised. After he left, she stood by the window, looking down at the campus. It looked different from this side of the glass. It was no longer a landscape of threats and obstacles, but a place she was now charged with protecting. She saw a familiar black sedan pull up. Kang Dae-ho got out, followed by Min Seok. They walked onto the quad, stopping near the azalea bed she used to tend. A few minutes later, there was a soft knock on her office door. She opened it to find Min Seok standing there, holding a piece of paper. He held it out to her. It was a drawing, rendered in surprisingly skillful crayon, of the azaleas. In the drawing, a tall woman with a cloud of black hair was holding a jacket over a small boy as rain fell around them. My father said you should have this, the boy said quietly. Nia took the drawing, her throat suddenly tight. Thank you, Min Seok. It's beautiful. He bowed formally and left. She looked up and saw Dae-ho waiting at the far end of the hall. He hadn't approached. He simply stood there, watching her. He gave her a single, almost imperceptible nod. A nod between equals, a nod that spoke of shared battles and a bond forged in fire and respect. He didn't need to say anything. The gesture, the drawing, his presence, it was his language. Protection, recognition, partnership. It was more than enough. She looked from the powerful man at the end of the hall to the drawing in her hand, then out the window to the garden below. She had not been rescued. She had not been gifted a new life. She had taken it. She had earned it with her mind, her courage, and her refusal to remain invisible. She was home, not in a place, but in the quiet, unshakable dignity of being fully and completely seen. What would you have done?